The horse bolted past the dry goods store, with empty stirrups swinging wild, and Temperance Whitmore didn't think before she lunged into the dusty street. Her boot heel caught a rut and she stumbled forward, arms reaching for the dragging reins. The animal's eyes showed white with panic, foam flecking its neck. Behind her, someone shouted a warning, but she was already moving, fingers closing around leather just as the horse reared. The impact knocked her sideways into the hitching post, pain flaring bright across her shoulder. She held on. The horse thrashed, hooves striking dirt inches from her skirt, but she wrapped the rein twice around her wrist and pulled hard, using her weight as anchor. Dust rose in a choking cloud. The animal's breath came in ragged snorts. Then a hand closed over hers on the rein, strong and sure, and a low voice spoke near her ear. "Steady. Now. Easy." The words weren't for her. A man stepped in close beside her, his other hand reaching for the bridle, and together they brought the horse down to all fours. The animal shuddered, sides heaving, but stopped fighting. Temperance looked up at the stranger. He had sandy brown hair falling across his forehead, an angular face with sharp lines, and eyes that held something old and careful. Clean-shaven, lean build under a weathered tan coat. He met her gaze for one long second, and she saw him register her completely, the way a man does when he's spent too long watching his back trail. "Thank you," she said, breathless. Her wrist ached where the rein had bitten in. He released the bridle slowly, stepped back half a pace. His voice was quiet, roughened by dust or distance. "You didn't hesitate. It needed doing." She unwound the rein from her wrist, flexed her fingers. The horse lowered its head, blowing hard. Someone's mount got spooked. The stranger glanced down the street, then back at her, and something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or calculation. "Mine," he said. "Tied him poorly. My fault." She studied him. His coat showed trail dust, his boots were scuffed, and he wore no gun belt, which was unusual. Men in Red Basin usually went armed, even the farmers. "You're new in town," she said, passing through. He took the reins from her hands, careful not to let their fingers brush again. "I'm grateful. Most people would have let him run. Most people have more sense." She brushed dirt from her skirt, wincing as her shoulder protested. But a runaway horse is a danger to everyone. He nodded once, still watching her with that wary intensity, and she realized he was memorizing her face the way she was memorizing his. Then he turned and led the horse toward the livery, his gait easy and unhurried despite the tension she'd felt in him. Temperance stood in the street, pulse still racing, and told herself the strange pull she'd felt was only adrenaline. She had a ranch to run, and no time for curiosity about drifters. She adjusted her shawl and walked toward the mercantile to finish her supply run, ignoring the way her hands still trembled. Inside the store, Mrs. Calloway leaned over the counter, eyes bright with gossip. "Did you see that man?" she asked, voice dropping. "Rode in this morning. Paid for his stable in silver coin, but wouldn't give a name." Temperance selected a sack of cornmeal, set it by the register. "Plenty of men prefer privacy." Mrs. Calloway sniffed. "In my experience, men with secrets have reasons. You ought to be careful, dear. A young woman alone on that ranch, it's not proper. I manage." Temperance kept her tone even. She'd heard variations of this lecture for 2 years, ever since she'd claimed the homestead after her father's death. The concern always had an edge, as if her independence was a judgment on the town's married women. She paid for her supplies, loaded them into the wagon bed, and drove out of town with the sun angling low. The road to Willow Ranch cut through open scrubland dotted with juniper and sage, the land rolling in long waves toward distant mesas. The wind carried the smell of dust and creosote. She loved this land with a fierceness that surprised her sometimes. Loved the way it demanded everything, and gave back just enough to keep hope alive. But tonight, as she guided the wagon down the rutted track, her mind kept circling back to the stranger's face. The way he'd looked at her. The way she'd felt seen. She shook her head, irritated with herself. Loneliness was a trap. She'd learned that watching her mother waste away, waiting for a husband who drank more than he worked. Temperance had chosen a different path. The ranch was hers, earned through sweat and stubbornness, and she didn't need a man to make it whole. The ranch house came into view, a low structure of weathered wood and stone with a covered porch facing west. The barn stood beyond, flanked by a corral and a windmill that turned lazily in the evening breeze. She'd built most of the corral herself, post by post, and every time she looked at it, she felt a fierce pride. She unhitched the wagon, hauled the supplies inside, and was lighting the lamp when she heard hoofbeats in the yard. Her hand went to the rifle by the door. Visitors after dark were rare and rarely welcome. She stepped onto the porch, rifle held low, but ready, and saw a rider approaching in the dusk. The figure resolved into the stranger from town, sitting easy in the saddle, hands visible. He stopped at the edge of the yard. "I didn't mean to alarm you," he called, "but your horse is favoring his left foreleg. Thought you'd want to know." Temperance frowned, lowered the rifle slightly. "How would you know that?" "I was at the livery when you left town. Watched you drive out." He dismounted slowly, no sudden moves. "I worked as a wrangler once. That hitch in his gait, it'll go lame if you don't rest him." She set the rifle against the porch post, walked down the steps into the yard. The evening light softened everything, turned the dust golden. "Why follow me out here to tell me?" He met her eyes, and again she felt that shock of recognition, as if they'd known each other in some other life. "Because you saved my horse this afternoon without asking for anything." Seemed fair to return the favor. She studied him. Up close she could see the weariness in his face, the way he held himself like a man expecting trouble. "What's your name?" He hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "Eamon Crow, Temperance Whitmore." She glanced toward the barn. "Show me." They walked to the corral together, and he pointed out the subtle signs she'd missed in her hurry, the way the gelding shifted weight, the tension in the shoulder. She felt a flicker of embarrassment at having overlooked it, but his tone held no judgment, only practical observation. "Rest him 3 days," he said. "Check the hoof for stones. If it's a bruise, it'll heal." She nodded. "Thank you." Then, because something reckless rose in her, she added, "Have you eaten?" His surprise was genuine. "No, ma'am. I have stew. It's plain, but it's hot." She didn't know why she was offering, only that the loneliness she'd denied all day suddenly felt unbearable, and he looked like he understood loneliness in his bones. Eamon glanced back toward town, toward the darkening road, and she saw him weigh the risk. Then he nodded. "I'd be grateful." They ate at the small table inside, the lamp casting warm light over plain dishes. She asked careful questions, and he gave careful answers. He'd worked ranches across 3 territories. He knew horses and cattle, could mend tack and fix a wagon axle. He didn't mention family or where he was headed next. She told him about the ranch, how she'd proved the claim herself after her father died, how the water rights were a constant battle with the larger spreads upstream. He listened with complete attention, the kind of focus that made her feel like every word mattered. When the meal was finished, he stood and thanked her with a formality that felt like distance. She walked him to the porch and watched him mount up. The night was full dark now, stars brilliant overhead. "Will you stay in Red Basin long?" she asked. "Depends." He gathered the reins. "On whether I find work. I could use help." The words came out before she could stop them. "The windmill needs repair, and I'm behind on fence mending. I can pay a fair wage." He looked down at her from the saddle, and she couldn't read his expression in the shadows. "I'll think on it," he said quietly. "Good night, Miss Whitmore." He rode off into the darkness, and she stood on the porch long after the hoofbeats faded, wondering what she'd just done. 3 days later, he appeared in her yard at dawn with his horse and a bedroll. She hired him on the spot, telling herself it was practical, that she needed the help. She gave him the small bunkhouse behind the barn and set him to work on the windmill. He was good with his hands, quick and thorough. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words were careful and true. He worked from sunrise to dusk without complaint. And in the evenings, he sometimes sat on the porch step and played a battered harmonica, the notes wandering and lonesome. She found herself listening for those moments, found herself watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice. The way he moved, economical and sure. The way he gentled the horses, speaking low. The way his face softened when he looked at the land, as if he were memorizing it against some future loss. A week passed. Then 2. The windmill turned smoothly again, and together they mended half the fenceline. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side, sharing meals on the porch, talking less than some, but saying more with silence. One afternoon, storm clouds built on the western horizon, dark and threatening. Eamon was in the barn checking the roof for leaks when Temperance came in, carrying a coil of rope. The air felt electric, charged with the coming weather. "We'll get rain tonight," she said. "First in 3 weeks." He looked up from the ladder, nodded. "Barn should hold. I patched the worst spots yesterday." She set the rope on a hook, hesitated. "Eamon, why did you really come here?" He climbed down slowly, brushed dust from his hands. The question hung between them like the storm. "Because I needed somewhere quiet," he said finally. "Somewhere I could work and not be noticed." "Are you running from something?" His jaw tightened. "Yes." She waited. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the barn door. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "I was accused of something I didn't do," he said, voice low. 2 years ago. They wanted to hang me for it, so I ran. I've been running since." Her heart kicked hard. "What were you accused of?" "Killing a man in a card game. But I wasn't even in that town when it happened. The man who did it wore a coat like mine, had hair like mine. That was enough." He looked at her directly, unflinching. "I'm not asking you to believe me. But I'm not a killer, Temperance. I'm just trying to stay alive long enough to prove it." She believed him. It was irrational, maybe reckless, but she looked into his face and knew he was telling the truth. Why tell me? Because I'm tired of lying. He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the shadows under his eyes, the weariness he carried. And because you deserve to know who you've got working your land. The first drops of rain hit the roof, scattered and hard. She didn't step back. If you're still running, why stop here? Because I'm tired of that too. His voice dropped. I thought maybe I could build something. Even if it's just for a season. Even if I have to leave again. You don't have to leave. The words came out fierce. If you're innocent, we'll find a way to prove it. He smiled. But it was sad. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. She lifted her chin. I'm saying I trust you. I'm saying this ranch is yours as long as you want it. I'm saying you're not alone anymore. Something broke in his face. He reached out slowly, as if expecting her to pull away, and touched her hand where it rested on the workbench. His fingers were rough, calloused, warm. Temperance, he said, and her name in his voice was a kind of confession. The storm broke overhead, rain drumming on the roof in a sudden torrent. She turned her hand, laced her fingers through his, and they stood there in the dim barn while the world outside turned to water and wind. That night, the storm raged for hours. She lay awake listening to the rain hammer the roof, thinking about what he'd told her, about the risks she was taking. But the doubt felt distant compared to the certainty she'd felt when he touched her hand. In the morning, the world was washed clean. She found him already up, checking the animals, and they worked through the day without speaking of what had passed between them. But everything had changed. The air felt different. The silences held weight. 2 days later, she rode into town for supplies and saw the wanted poster on the saloon wall. The sketch was rough, but the name leapt out at her. Eamon Crow. Wanted for murder. $500 reward. Her blood went cold. She stood staring at the poster while people moved past her on the boardwalk, oblivious. The sketch could have been anyone. Could have been him. The description was vague. Brown hair. Tall. Lean build. Last seen in Colorado Territory. Mrs. Calloway appeared beside her, voice dropping to a scandalized whisper. Can you imagine? A murderer could be walking among us right now, and we wouldn't even know. Temperance forced herself to breathe. Have they caught him? Not yet. But Marshal Cordell says he'll hang the moment someone turns him in. Mrs. Calloway's eyes gleamed. $500 would change a person's life. Temperance made herself nod, made herself turn away. She finished her supply run in a daze, loaded the wagon, and drove back to the ranch with her heart pounding. She didn't know what to do. Didn't know if she should confront him or stay silent. Didn't know if keeping his secret made her complicit. When she reached the ranch, she found him repairing the corral gate. He looked up, smiled, and the smile faded when he saw her face. What happened? She climbed down from the wagon, walked to him, pulled the folded poster from her pocket. This was on the saloon wall. He took it, unfolded it, went very still. Then he handed it back to her. So now you know. I knew before. You told me. But seeing it like this, with a price on your head, it's different. He nodded slowly. I'll leave tonight. You shouldn't be involved. No. The word came out hard. You're not, running again. Not yet. Temperance. If someone recognizes me, if the marshal comes here, you'll lose everything. Your ranch, your reputation. Maybe worse. I don't care. She stepped closer, fierce. You said you were innocent. I believe you. We're going to prove it. How? He laughed, bitter. I don't even know who the real killer was. I just ran. Then we start by figuring out who wanted you blamed. She folded the poster, shoved it in her pocket. Who had reason? Who stood to gain? He stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Then, slowly, something shifted in his face. There was a man, he said. Gambler named Pike Venner. He was in debt to the man who died. Big debt. After the killing, the debt disappeared. But Pike was well liked. No one suspected him. Where is he now? Don't know. He drifted after the trial collapsed. Could be anywhere. She nodded, mind already working. We'll start asking questions. Quietly. And in the meantime, you stay out of town. Work here. Keep your head down. And if the marshal comes, we'll deal with it. She met his eyes. Together, he reached out, cupped her face with one rough hand. You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met, he said softly. Good. She turned her face into his palm. Because you're going to need that. The weeks that followed were a careful dance of secrecy and work. Eamon stayed close to the ranch, venturing out only at dawn or dusk, when the light made faces hard to read. Temperance went into town for supplies and listened to gossip, searching for any mention of Pike Venner or the Colorado killing. She learned that Marshal Cordell was new to Red Basin, appointed by the territorial governor. He had a reputation for ambition and a cold efficiency. She learned that Cordell was pushing hard to find Eamon Crow, sending telegrams to every town within 100 miles. The pressure was building. One night, she and Eamon sat on the porch after supper, watching the stars come out. The harmonica lay silent on the step between them. She told him what she'd learned, and he listened with that quiet intensity she'd come to love. Love. The word stopped her cold. But it was true. Somewhere in the careful days and shared silences, she'd fallen for him. For his gentleness with the animals, his steady hands, the way he looked at her like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. Temperance, he said quietly. If this goes wrong, I need you to let me go. Don't fight for me. Don't risk your life. No. She turned to face him. We're past that. You're not leaving, unless I'm coming with you. He closed his eyes. You don't know what you're asking for. Life on the run, it's hard and lonely, and it never stops. Then it's good I'm stubborn. She reached for his hand. Eamon, I've spent 2 years building this ranch alone because I thought I had to prove I didn't need anyone. But that's not strength. That's just fear. You've shown me what real strength looks like. It's letting someone stand with you. He turned his hand, laced his fingers through hers. I don't deserve you. You don't get to decide that. I do. And I choose this. I choose you. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, and kissed her. It was careful and sweet and full of all the things they hadn't said. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. If we do this, he whispered, we do it all the way. No more secrets. No more secrets. She kissed him again, and this time it was fierce, a claiming and a promise. The next morning, a rider came up the road. Temperance was hanging laundry when she saw him, and her stomach dropped. Marshal Cordell. Tall, gray-haired, with a star pinned to his vest and a rifle across his saddle. Eamon was in the barn, out of sight. But if the marshal searched, he'd find him. She walked to meet Cordell at the yard's edge, drying her hands on her apron. "Marshal, what brings you out here?" Cordell tipped his hat, but his eyes were cold. "Miss Whitmore, I'm looking for a man." Eamon Crow. Wanted for murder. I have reason to believe he may have passed through this area. Her pulse hammered. I haven't seen any strangers. You're sure? Cordell's gaze moved past her to the barn, the bunkhouse. Because I heard you hired a man recently. Drifter. No name given. I hired a hand, yes. His name is James Kern. He's from Kansas. Been here 3 weeks. Cordell studied her. I'd like to speak with him. He's mending fence on the south section. Won't be back until sundown. She kept her voice steady. If you want to wait, you're welcome to water your horse. The marshal considered, then shook his head. I'll come back tomorrow. Make sure he's here. Of course. She watched him ride away, every muscle tight, and as soon as he was out of sight, she ran to the barn. Eamon was waiting just inside the door, face grim. He knows, she said. Or suspects. He's coming back tomorrow. Then I leave tonight. He moved to the bunkhouse, started gathering his few belongings. She followed. Where will you go? Doesn't matter. Far enough that you're safe. I'm coming with you. She grabbed his arm. I told you. We're in this together. He turned, gripped her shoulders. Temperance, listen to me. If you run with me, you lose everything. Your ranch, your home, your whole life. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm choosing. She met his eyes. This ranch was supposed to be my home, but it's just land. You're what makes it home. So if you go, I go. He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. I don't know how to keep you safe. We'll figure it out. She held him tight. But we have to leave now, before he comes back with more men. They packed quickly, taking only what they could carry on horseback. Food, blankets, a few clothes. She left a note for her neighbor, asking him to look after the place, knowing she might never see it again. The sacrifice tore at her, but when she looked at Eamon, the choice felt clear. They rode out at dusk, heading east into the open country. The land stretched wide and empty, painted red and gold by the setting sun. Behind them, Red Basin disappeared into shadow. They rode through the night, stopping only to rest the horses. At dawn, they found a shallow canyon with a seep spring and made camp in the shelter of the rocks. Exhaustion pulled at them both, but Eamon built a small fire and boiled coffee, while Temperance checked the horses. When she came back to the fire, he handed her a tin cup. She wrapped her hands around it, grateful for the warmth. The morning air was cold, the sky pale and enormous. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For all of this. Don't be. She sipped the bitter coffee. I made my choice. You shouldn't have had to make it. He stared into the fire. I should have kept riding that first day. Should have never stopped in Red Basin. If you had, I'd still be alone on that ranch, pretending I was fine. She set the cup down. Amen. Meeting you was the best thing that's happened to me in years. Maybe ever. He looked at her. Something fierce and fragile in his face. I love you, he said. I know I shouldn't. I know it complicates everything. But I do. Her heart cracked open. I love you too. She moved to him, and he pulled her close, and they sat tangled together by the fire as the sun rose over the canyon rim. They stayed hidden for 3 days, resting the horses and making plans. Eamon wanted to head north into Montana, find work on a ranch where no one knew his name. Temperance suggested they try to find Pike Venner, force a confession. It was dangerous, maybe impossible, but it was the only way to truly clear his name. On the 4th morning, they heard hoofbeats echoing through the canyon. Eamon grabbed his rifle, positioned himself behind a boulder. Temperance stood by the horses, ready to mount. The rider came into view slowly, hands raised to show he was unarmed. She recognized him. Her neighbor Tom Graves, a weathered man in his 50s who'd been kind when she first claimed the homestead. Tom, she called. What are you doing here? He dismounted, approached carefully. Came to warn you. Marshal Cordell found your note. He's got a posse together. They're tracking you. Her blood went cold. How far behind? Half a day. Maybe less. Tom's eyes shifted to Eamon. You must be the one they're after. Eamon lowered the rifle slightly. I didn't kill anyone. I believe you. Tom pulled a folded paper from his coat. This came in on the telegraph yesterday. Thought you'd want to see it. Temperance took the paper, unfolded it. It was a telegram from a sheriff in Colorado. New evidence in the Crow case. Witness placed Pike Venner at the scene. Warrant issued. Crow cleared of charges. She stared at the words, not quite believing. Eamon moved to her side, read over her shoulder. His breath caught. They found him? Tom nodded. Venner got caught cheating at cards in Denver. When they arrested him, he bragged about the killing, said he'd framed someone else for it. The sheriff wired every town in 3 territories. So I'm free. Eamon's voice was hoarse. It's over. Not quite. Tom's expression darkened. Cordell doesn't know about the telegram yet. He left town before it arrived. And he's the type who shoots first and checks warrants later. You need to get back to Red Basin. Show that telegram to the judge before Cordell finds you. Can you take it to the judge? Temperance asked. Explain what happened. I tried. Judge won't act without seeing you both in person. Says he needs to verify the story. Tom glanced at the canyon rim. But if you ride hard, you can reach town before the posse catches up. I'll slow them down. Tell them I saw you heading west. Why would you do that? Eamon asked. Because Miss Whitmore's been a good neighbor. And because I've seen innocent men hang. Tom mounted up. Go. And ride fast. They broke camp in minutes, mounted their horses, and pushed east toward Red Basin. The land blurred past, scrub and stone and endless sky. They rode in silence, saving breath, trusting the horses to find their footing. By afternoon, the horses were lathered and blowing. They stopped at a creek to water them, and Temperance saw dust rising behind them on the horizon. The posse. Eamon saw it too. We're not going to make it. Yes, we are. She checked her cinch, swung back into the saddle. Come on. They rode harder. The town appeared in the distance, wavering in the heat. Behind them, the dust cloud grew closer. She could hear shouts now, carried on the wind. They galloped into Red Basin's main street, scattering chickens and drawing stares. Temperance pulled up in front of the judge's office, half fell from the saddle. Eamon was beside her in an instant, and together they burst through the door. Judge Harris looked up from his desk, startled. Miss Whitmore? She thrust the telegram at him. This came yesterday. Eamon Crow is innocent. The real killer confessed. You have to stop Marshal Cordell before he does something everyone regrets. The judge took the telegram, read it slowly. Then he stood, grabbed his coat. Stay here. Both of you. He walked out into the street just as the posse thundered in. Cordell was in the lead, rifle drawn. The marshal saw Eamon through the office window and swung the rifle up. Hold your fire, Judge Harris shouted. This man is innocent. I have the proof. Cordell didn't lower the rifle. He's wanted for murder. Was wanted. The charges are dropped. The real killer is in custody in Colorado. Judge Harris held up the telegram. If you shoot him now, Marshal, you'll hang for it. The street went silent. Cordell stared at the judge, then at Eamon, fury and frustration warring in his face. Slowly, he lowered the rifle. I'll need to verify this. You do that. The judge's voice was steel. In the meantime, Eamon Crow is a free man. And if I hear you've harassed him or Miss Whitmore, I'll have your badge. Cordell wheeled his horse and rode off, the posse following. The street slowly came back to life, people murmuring and staring. Judge Harris turned to Temperance and Eamon. Come inside. We'll get this sorted officially. It took an hour. Statements, signatures, the telegram sent to the territorial marshal for confirmation. When they finally walked out of the office, the sun was setting, painting the street in shades of gold and shadow. Eamon stopped on the boardwalk, looked at her. It's really over, he said, voice wondering. I don't have to run anymore. You don't have to run. She took his hand. But you do have to decide what comes next. I already know. He turned to face her fully. I want to stay at Willow Ranch. I want to help you build it into something real. If you'll have me. Her throat tightened. As a hired hand? As a partner? As whatever you want me to be. He lifted her hand, pressed it to his chest. I know I don't have much to offer. No land, no money. Just my hands and my word. That's enough. She stepped closer. More than enough. He kissed her there in the street, in front of half the town, and she didn't care who saw. Let them talk. Let them gossip. She'd found something worth more than reputation or respectability. She'd found a man who'd faced his worst fear and come through it with his honor intact. She'd found a partner who saw her strength and wasn't afraid of it. When they finally broke apart, Mrs. Calloway was standing on the boardwalk across the street, mouth open. Temperance waved at her, and the older woman flushed and hurried inside. We're going to scandalize the whole town, Eamon said, grinning. Good. She laced her fingers through his. Let them be scandalized. We'll be too busy working the ranch to care. They rode back to Willow Ranch in the long dusk, side by side. The land stretched out around them, familiar and welcoming. When the house came into view, Temperance felt a surge of relief so strong it was almost painful. Home. They unsaddled the horses, turned them into the corral. The windmill turned lazily in the evening breeze, the sound a quiet music. Inside, Temperance lit the lamp while Eamon built up the fire. They moved around each other with an easy familiarity, as if they'd been doing this for years. After supper, they sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. He played the harmonica, those wandering lonesome notes. But tonight, they didn't sound lonely. They sounded like contentment. "Marry me," he said into the music's pause. She turned to him, startled. "What?" "Marry me." He set the harmonica aside. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a couple of months. But I love you, and I want to build a life here with you. A real life. Legal and proper." Tears stung her eyes. "Yes." He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. "I'll do right by you," he whispered. "I swear it." "I know." She held him tight. "You already have." They were married the following week in a small ceremony at the church. Tom Graves stood as witness, along with a few neighbors who'd come around once the gossip settled. Judge Harris officiated, a small smile on his weathered face. Temperance wore a new dress, pale green cotton with lace at the collar, and Eamon wore a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit. But when he took her hand and spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure, and she felt the future open up before them, bright and possible. The reception was held at the ranch, a simple gathering with food and music. Someone brought a fiddle, and they danced in the yard under the stars. Eamon held her close, swaying to the music, and she rested her head on his shoulder and felt completely, perfectly at peace. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. They worked the ranch together, mending what the storm had damaged, planning improvements for the spring. Eamon proved as good a partner in planning as he was in labor, and together they dreamed of expanding the herd, maybe buying the adjoining section if it came available. One afternoon, a month after the wedding, a stranger rode into the yard. Temperance tensed, old instincts flaring, but Eamon walked out to meet him calmly. The man dismounted, introduced himself as a land agent from the territorial office. "I'm here about the water rights dispute," he said. "The territorial governor has ruled in favor of the smaller homesteads. The upstream ranches can no longer divert more than their fair share. You'll have reliable water from now on." Temperance felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She'd been fighting that battle for 2 years, always losing, always having to make do with less. "That's wonderful news," she said. The agent tipped his hat. "Congratulations, Mrs. Crow. You've earned it." After he left, Eamon turned to her, grinning. "Mrs. Crow, I'm still getting used to that." "Me too." She took his hand. "But I like it." They stood in the yard, looking out at the land they'd fought for, the home they were building together. The windmill turned in the breeze, water flowing into the trough. The horses grazed peacefully in the corral. The sky stretched wide and blue overhead. "This is what I wanted," she said quietly. "When I proved this claim, when I decided to do it alone, this is what I was trying to build. But I didn't know it could feel like this." "Like what?" "Like I'm not fighting anymore." She turned to face him. "Like I can just live." He pulled her close, kissed her forehead. "We're going to have a good life here, Temperance. I promise you that." I know. She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and sure. And I'm going to hold you to it. Winter came, cold and hard, but the ranch weathered it. They spent the long evenings by the fire, planning and dreaming, sometimes in words, and sometimes in comfortable silence. Eamon taught her to play the harmonica, and though she was terrible at it, he never laughed. Temperance taught him to cook her father's stew recipe, and though he burned it the first 3 times, she never complained. In the spring, they planted a garden. In the summer, they expanded the corral and brought in 6 new head of cattle. By fall, the ranch was thriving in a way it never had when Temperance worked alone. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she said, "I never thanked you." "For what?" "For stopping when you should have kept riding. For staying when it got dangerous. For choosing me." He turned to her, took her hand. "I didn't choose you, Temperance. You chose me. You looked at a wanted man and saw something worth saving. That takes courage I can't even fathom." It wasn't courage. She squeezed his hand. It was just knowing what mattered. And what matters? This. She gestured at the land, the house, the life they'd built. You. Us. Everything we've made together. He kissed her as the last light faded from the sky, and she knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. Not the safe choice. Not the easy choice. But the true one. Years later, when people asked her about that time, about the outlaw she'd harbored and married, she would tell them the truth. That Eamon Crow was the best man she'd ever known. That he'd worked harder than anyone to prove his innocence, not just to the law, but to himself. That he'd given her a partnership deeper than any she'd imagined possible. But tonight, in the quiet of the porch with his hand warm in hers, no words were needed. The land stretched out around them, dark and peaceful. The stars came out one by one. The windmill turned in the breeze, its steady creak a kind of song. And Temperance Whitmore Crow, who'd once thought she had to face the world alone, leaned against her husband's shoulder and knew she was home. The following spring brought new challenges. A late frost threatened the garden, and they spent a frantic night covering seedlings with every blanket they owned. A coyote got into the chicken coop, and Eamon sat up 3 nights running to chase it off. The roof developed a leak over the bedroom, and they had to move their bed into the main room while he patched it. But these were the problems of a life lived fully, not the problems of survival. They faced each one together, and afterward, they were stronger for it. One morning, Temperance woke to find Eamon already up, standing on the porch and staring at the eastern horizon. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and joined him. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." He glanced at her, smiled. "I was just thinking. 3 years ago, I was sleeping in barns and stealing food to stay alive. Now I have a home, a wife, a future. It doesn't seem real sometimes. It's real." She took his hand. "And you earned every bit of it. We earned it." He pulled her close. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." A rider appeared on the road, coming fast. They both tensed, old habits rising. But as the figure drew closer, Temperance recognized Judge Harris. The old man pulled up in the yard, breathing hard. "Thought you'd want to know," he called. "Marshal Cordell resigned. Took a job in Kansas. You won't have to worry about him anymore." Relief washed through her. "Thank you for riding out to tell us." It's not just that. Judge Harris dismounted, pulled an envelope from his saddlebag. This came for you. From Colorado. Eamon took the envelope, opened it carefully. Inside was a letter and a bank draft. He read the letter aloud. Mr. Crow. The state of Colorado wishes to apologize for the wrongful accusation and the hardship it caused. Enclosed is compensation for lost wages and damages. We hope this helps you rebuild your life. Signed, the Territorial Governor. The bank draft was for $2,000. Temperance stared at it. That's a fortune. Eamon handed it to her. It's ours. We can expand the ranch, buy more cattle, maybe build a bigger house. Or we can save it. Build something for the future. She looked at him. Our future. He understood what she was saying. His expression softened. You're sure? I'm sure. She folded the draft carefully. We'll put it in the bank in town. And when the time comes, we'll use it. That summer, they hosted a barn dance for the neighbors. It was Temperance's idea, a way to give back to the community that had accepted them. They cleared the barn, hung lanterns from the rafters, and Tom Graves brought his fiddle. People came from miles around, families and single men and widows, everyone dressed in their best. Eamon danced with her until her feet hurt, then danced with Mrs. Calloway and two of the neighbors' daughters. He laughed more that night than she'd ever seen, his face open and young. Watching him, she felt a fierce pride. This was the man people had wanted to hang. This was the man she'd risked everything to save. And he was worth it. Every risk. Every sacrifice. Near midnight, as the party wound down, Tom Graves pulled out his harmonica and played a slow, sweet tune. Eamon took Temperance's hand and led her to the center of the barn. They swayed together under the lantern light, alone in the crowd, and he whispered, "Thank you." For what? For seeing me when I was invisible. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. For giving me a reason to stop running. She looked up at him, this man who'd become her whole world. You gave me a reason too, she said. To stop building walls and start building a life. He kissed her there in front of everyone, and the room erupted in cheers and laughter. She didn't care. Let them see. Let them know. This love was hard-won and real, and she wasn't ashamed of it. In the fall, Temperance realized she was pregnant. She told Eamon on a quiet evening as they sat by the fire, and he went very still. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. Are you sure? He asked, voice rough. I'm sure. He pulled back, looked at her face, and she saw tears in his eyes. I'm going to be a father. You're going to be a wonderful father. She touched his cheek. The best. That night, they lay awake in bed, talking about names and futures and all the things they wanted for their child. Eamon's hand rested on her belly, protective and tender. I want our child to know safety, he said. Real safety. The kind I never had. They will. She covered his hand with hers. We'll make sure of it. The pregnancy was hard. Morning sickness lasted months, and the winter was bitter. But Eamon was relentless in his care, bringing her tea and dry toast, rubbing her aching back, sitting with her through the long nights when sleep wouldn't come. In the spring, when the first wildflowers bloomed, their daughter was born. They named her Grace, because grace was what they'd been given, when they least deserved it. She was small and perfect, with dark hair and serious eyes. And when Eamon held her for the first time, Temperance saw him completely undone. "I'll keep you safe," he whispered to the baby. "I promise." Temperance watched him. This man who'd been branded a killer, cradling their daughter with such tenderness, and she knew that everything they'd been through had led to this moment. All the fear, all the running, all the risk. It had brought them here. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons. Grace grew strong and curious, learning to walk, then run, then ride. Eamon taught her about horses and cattle, about reading the weather and respecting the land. Temperance taught her to cook and sew, to read and write, to stand up for herself. When Grace was 3, they had a son. They named him Samuel, after Temperance's father. He was quieter than his sister, thoughtful and gentle. Eamon loved him fiercely, this boy who would never have to run from false accusations, who would never know the terror of a noose. The ranch prospered. They bought the adjoining section, expanded the herd, built a new barn. Other homesteaders came to them for advice, and Eamon became known as a fair man and a skilled rancher. The wanted poster was forgotten, replaced by a reputation built on hard work and integrity. Marshall Cordell's replacement was a younger man named Webb, practical and honest. He and Eamon became cautious friends, bonding over a shared respect for justice. Webb often stopped by the ranch to water his horse and share news from town, and Temperance learned to relax when she saw a rider coming. One evening, when Grace was 7 and Samuel was 4, they all sat on the porch watching the sunset. Grace was practicing the harmonica, producing sounds that were more enthusiasm than music. Samuel sat in Eamon's lap, drowsy and content. Temperance leaned against the porch post, watching her family, and felt a completeness so profound it was almost overwhelming. "Tell us the story," Grace said, setting down the harmonica. "About how you and Papa met." Temperance exchanged a glance with Eamon. "We've told you that story 100 times. Tell it again." Grace settled beside her mother, eyes bright. "Start with the runaway horse." So Temperance told it, editing carefully for young ears. She told about the rescue, about hiring a stranger, about learning to trust. She told about the storm and the wanted poster and the desperate ride back to Red Basin. She told about Judge Harris standing in the street, about justice arriving just in time. She didn't tell about the fear, about the nights she'd lain awake wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake, about the moment she'd seen that wanted poster and felt her world tilt. Those parts were hers, and Eamon's alone. Private scars they didn't need to share. Grace listened with rapt attention, even though she'd heard the story many times. "And then you got married," she prompted. "Then we got married." Temperance smiled. "And we lived happily ever after." Grace wrinkled her nose. "That's not the end. You're still living." "You're right." Temperance pulled her daughter close. "We are still living, still building, still choosing each other every day." "That's the real story," Eamon added. "Not the dramatic parts. The everyday choosing. That's what matters." Later, after the children were in bed, Temperance and Eamon sat on the porch in the quiet dark. "You're a good father," she said. "Better than you think. I'm learning." He took her hand. "Same as I learned to be a husband. Same as I learned to be a rancher. You've been patient with me. You've been patient with me too." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I wasn't easy to love." "Yes, you were." He kissed her hair. You were the easiest thing I've ever done." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds. The windmill, the horses shifting in the corral, an owl calling from the cottonwoods. This was the life they'd built, moment by moment, choice by choice. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. 10 years after that barn dance, Tom Graves passed away quietly in his sleep. The funeral brought the whole community together, and Eamon was one of the pallbearers. At the graveside, he spoke briefly about Tom's kindness, about how the old man had helped them when help mattered most. Afterward, Tom's son approached Eamon. "My father left something for you," he said, handing over a sealed envelope. "Said to give it to you when he was gone." Eamon opened it that evening, alone in the barn. Inside was a short letter in Tom's shaky handwriting. "Eamon, I knew who you were from the start. Saw that wanted poster same as everyone. But I also saw how you looked at Miss Whitmore, how you worked her land like it was your own. Figured a man who cared that much couldn't be all bad. I was right. You've been a good neighbor and a good man. Don't ever doubt that." Tom. Eamon sat in the barn for a long time, the letter in his hands. Then he went to find Temperance. She was in the garden, checking the tomatoes. He showed her the letter without a word. She read it, then looked up at him. He knew all along. He knew. And he helped anyway. Eamon's voice was tight. "All these years, I thought we'd fooled everyone. Maybe we did fool some people. But the ones who mattered saw the truth." She touched his face. "They saw who you really are." That night, they added Tom's letter to the small wooden box where they kept their important papers. The deed to the ranch, the marriage certificate, Grace's and Samuel's birth records, the letter from the Colorado governor. And now, Tom's final kindness. These were the documents of a life built from nothing. These were the proof that they'd survived and thrived. Grace turned 16 and started teaching at the new schoolhouse in Red Basin. Samuel, 13, showed a talent for working with horses that surpassed even his father's. The ranch was now one of the most successful in the territory, and people came from far away to buy crowbred stock. One evening, a stranger rode up to the house. Eamon was repairing a saddle on the porch, and Temperance was churning butter. The stranger dismounted, introduced himself as a journalist from a Denver newspaper. "I'm writing a story about wrongful convictions," he said, "about men who were accused and later cleared. I heard your story, Mr. Crow, and I'd like to include it in my article." Eamon set down the saddle. "That was a long time ago, but it's important." The journalist pulled out a notebook. "Your case helped change how the territory handles evidence. The reforms that came after your exoneration have saved lives." Eamon glanced at Temperance. She nodded slightly. He turned back to the journalist. "All right, I'll talk to you. But you leave my family out of it." The interview lasted 2 hours. Eamon told his story plainly, without embellishment. He talked about the fear, the running, the moment he decided to stop. He talked about Temperance's courage, about Judge Harris's integrity, about Tom Graves's quiet help. He talked about the cost of false accusation and the value of second chances. When the article came out 3 months later, Eamon's name was cleared not just legally, but publicly. The story was picked up by newspapers across the West. Letters arrived from other men who'd been wrongfully accused, thanking him for speaking out. Temperance watched him read those letters, saw the old pain in his face mixed with something new. Satisfaction, maybe. Or closure. "You did a good thing," she said. "I just told the truth." He folded the letters carefully. But if it helped someone else, then maybe it was all worth something. It was worth everything. She took his hand. "Look at what we built. Look at our children. Look at this life." That's what it was worth. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Eamon surprised Temperance with a gift. It was a small painting, done by an artist from Santa Fe, showing Willow Ranch from the eastern approach. The house, the barn, the windmill, all rendered in careful detail. In the foreground, two figures stood together, faces indistinct, but postures unmistakable. "It's beautiful," she said, tears in her eyes. "When did you commission this?" 6 months ago. He hung it on the wall above the fireplace. "I wanted something to remember this by. All of it. The struggle and the triumph. We don't need a painting to remember." She touched his face, this man who'd aged beside her, who'd worked beside her, who'd loved her through everything. "But I'm glad we have it anyway." That evening, they hosted a small celebration. Judge Harris came, now fully retired but still sharp. Marshall Webb came with his wife and daughters. Grace and Samuel invited friends from town. The house was full of noise and laughter, and Temperance moved through it all feeling grateful for every hard-won moment. At one point, she found herself standing alone on the porch, watching the sun set over the land she'd claimed so long ago. Eamon came out to join her, handed her a cup of cider. 20 years, he said. "Can you believe it? Some days, no. Some days it feels like just yesterday that you rode up to warn me about my horse." She sipped the cider. "But then I look at Grace and Samuel, and I know it's been a lifetime. The best lifetime." He put his arm around her. "I wouldn't change a single moment. Not even the running, not even the fear, not even that. Because it led here. To you. To this." He gestured at the ranch, the house full of people, the children laughing inside. "This is everything I never let myself want." "Me too." She leaned into him. "I thought I had to be alone to be strong. You showed me I was wrong." Inside, someone started playing the fiddle. Grace's voice rose in song, clear and sweet. Samuel joined in, his voice deeper now, on the edge of manhood. The music drifted out into the twilight, mingling with the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. "Dance with me," Eamon said. "Here? On the porch? Why not?" He took her hand, pulled her close. Same as we did in the barn that first summer. They swayed together in the fading light. No music but the fiddle inside and the wind in the cottonwoods. His hands were rough and familiar, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. This was the man who'd been worth every risk. This was the love she'd fought for, and she'd do it all again. Years continued to pass. Grace married a good man, a teacher from Red Basin, and they built a house on the eastern section of the ranch. Samuel took over more of the daily work, running cattle and training horses with a skill that made Eamon proud. Grandchildren came, and the house that had once felt too big for two people was suddenly full of noise and life again. Eamon's hair went fully gray, and his hands developed the stiffness that comes with age and hard work. But he still rose before dawn, still checked the fences, and tended the animals. Temperance's hair turned silver, and her face showed the lines of years under the western sun. But her eyes were still bright, her will still iron strong. They sat on the porch most evenings now, watching the grandchildren play in the yard, listening to Grace and Samuel discuss ranch business. Sometimes Eamon played the harmonica, the notes slower but still sweet. Sometimes they just sat in silence, hands linked, content. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Temperance said, "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" "How do you mean?" "If you'd kept writing that first day. If I'd turned you in. If Tom hadn't helped us. If the telegram had come a day later." She watched the light fade. So many moments where everything could have gone wrong, but they didn't. He squeezed her hand. "We were lucky. Or blessed. Or both. We were brave." She looked at him. "Don't discount that. We chose each other when it wasn't safe. We fought for each other when it wasn't easy. That's not luck. That's courage. Your courage. I was just trying to survive." "No." She turned to face him fully. "You chose to trust me. You chose to stop running. You chose to believe in a future when you had every reason not to. That took more courage than anything I did." He pulled her close, and they sat together as the stars emerged one by one. The ranch was quiet now. The grandchildren called inside for supper. The animals settled for the night. In the distance, the windmill turned, its familiar creak a sound so constant they barely heard it anymore. This is what happiness is, Temperance thought. Not the dramatic moments, not the rescues or the narrow escapes. Just this. Sitting on a porch with the man you love, watching the stars come out, knowing you built something real and lasting together. Eamon started to say something, then stopped. She looked at him, questioning. He smiled. "I was just going to say I love you, but I've said it 10,000 times. Say it again. I love you, Temperance Crow. More today than yesterday. More tomorrow than today." She kissed him, soft and lingering. "And I love you. Always." Inside, someone called them for supper. They stood slowly, joints protesting, and walked into the warm house together. The table was crowded, loud, full of family. Grace passed bowls of food. Samuel carved the roast. The grandchildren chattered and laughed. Eamon caught Temperance's eye across the table, and she saw in his face the same wonder she felt. That this was their life. That they'd survived everything that tried to break them. That they'd not only endured, but thrived. After the meal, after the dishes were washed and the children put to bed, after everyone else had gone home or retired, Eamon and Temperance returned to the porch one last time. The night was cool, the stars brilliant overhead. "No matter how many years I live," Eamon said quietly, "I'll never forget the day you grabbed that horse's reins. The way you didn't hesitate. The way you looked at me afterward. I'll never forget the way you stayed," she replied. "When you could have run, when you should have run, you stayed, because you were worth staying for." He pulled her close. "You've always been worth it." They stood together in the starlight, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd built a life from nothing but trust and hard work and stubborn love. The ranch stretched out around them, dark and peaceful. Inside, their family slept safe and warm. And Temperance thought, for the 1000th time, that she would do it all again. Every risk, every fear, every moment of doubt. Because this, right here, was worth everything. Eamon passed away in his sleep on a clear spring morning, 2 months after their 40th anniversary. He was 73. Temperance woke to find him beside her, peaceful, his hand still resting on hers. She sat with him for a long time, memorizing his face, whispering all the things she'd already told him 1,000 times. The funeral was held at the church in Red Basin, and people came from across 3 territories. The marshal sent a letter of condolence. The territorial governor sent flowers. The Denver journalist who'd written about Eamon's case came in person, an old man now himself. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, where he could see the land he'd loved, the home he'd built, the family he'd created. Temperance stood at the graveside surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and she didn't cry. Not then. She'd cried enough in the private hours before dawn. Instead, she told them all a story about a runaway horse and a stranger who helped, about a man who'd been brave enough to trust when trust was terrifying, about choosing love even when it was dangerous, about building a life one day at a time. He gave me everything, she said. Not money or status or ease. He gave me partnership. He gave me courage. He gave me a reason to stop hiding behind my walls. She looked at Grace and Samuel, at her grandchildren. And he gave me all of you. That's his legacy. Not the ranch. Not the success. You. After the funeral, people lingered, sharing memories. Samuel told about the time Eamon taught him to break a horse. Grace told about her father sitting up all night with her when she had fever. Friends told stories of kindness, of integrity, of a man who'd lived with honor despite everything that tried to break him. Temperance listened to it all, and she was grateful. This was how Eamon would be remembered. Not as the wanted man, not as the outlaw, but as the husband, father, grandfather, neighbor, friend. As the man who'd built a good life from the ashes of a false accusation. She lived another 5 years, tending the ranch with Samuel's help, watching the grandchildren grow, teaching the great-grandchildren to ride. She never remarried. People asked, gently, if she was lonely. She told them she wasn't. How could she be lonely when Eamon was in every corner of the house, every post of the fence, every turn of the windmill? On quiet evenings, she sat on the porch and played his harmonica, the notes clumsy but heartfelt. She looked at the painting above the fireplace and remembered. She read the letters he'd written her during their life together, few but precious. She touched the dent in the porch step where he'd always sat, and she was content. Grace found her one morning in late summer, sitting in her chair on the porch, looking out at the land. She'd passed in the night, peacefully, a slight smile on her weathered face. On her lap was a photograph, creased and faded, showing her and Eamon on their wedding day, young and uncertain, but fiercely determined. They buried her beside Eamon on the hillside. The whole family gathered again, bigger now, 3 generations strong. Samuel spoke about his mother's strength, her stubborn love, her refusal to let fear dictate her life. Grace spoke about how their parents had shown them what real partnership looked like. And then they went back to the ranch, because that's what Temperance would have wanted. They worked the land, tended the animals, sat on the porch in the evening and watched the sunset. The windmill turned in the breeze. The horses grazed peacefully. The house stood solid and welcoming. The ranch stayed in the family for generations. Samuel's children ran it, then their children. The story of Amen and Temperance became family legend, told and retold, each generation adding their own understanding. The painting still hung above the fireplace. The wanted poster was framed in the barn, a reminder of where they'd come from. The box of important papers was passed down, each new generation adding their own. And on clear nights, when the stars were bright and the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, people said you could still feel them there. Two souls who'd found each other against impossible odds. Two people who'd built a life from trust and courage and stubborn, enduring love. The outlaw and the homesteader. The man who ran and the woman who stood. The partnership that changed everything. And so their story ended where it began. With the land. With the choice to trust. With the courage to love when love was dangerous. With two people who looked at each other and saw possibility instead of risk. Their names were carved on those simple headstones. Amen Crow, Temperance Crow, beloved husband and wife, builders, partners, forever. But the real memorial was the ranch itself, the fences they'd mended together, the barn they'd raised, the windmill that turned faithfully, season after season, year after year. The children and grandchildren who carried their blood and their values forward into the world. That was the happy ending. Not perfection, not ease, but a life lived fully and bravely, a love earned through action and choice, a home built on trust that endured long after the builders were gone. And in the evening, when the wind shifted just right, you could almost hear it. The sound of a harmonica playing a lonesome tune. The creak of the porch step. The quiet laughter of two people who'd found each other when the world said they shouldn't. Who'd loved each other when it was dangerous. Who'd built something beautiful from nothing but faith and stubborn hope. The outlaw she couldn't turn in. The woman who saved him. The love that changed everything. That was their story. And it was enough